The hands are the instruments of a child's intelligence. That's why play is so important for this age, because their learning continues to be very experiential. It's not yet super like cognitive like we think about it as adults. For kids, learning is play, and play is growth. It's enjoyable, but it's also like the work that they do to learn about themselves and their world. Love covers a multitude of sins. And I think that that's really true about parenting is we can fail so many times in so many ways and not have the skill sets, and they're going to be okay if they know that they can trust and fall back on the secure base. You can't really understand a child's emotional life without understanding their relational life at home.
Acting on emotions as guides to truth. Stillness. Surrendering to what is. Seeking. Using my gifts with purpose. Light. This is the emotional blueprint.
Adam Rogers, welcome to the Emotional Blueprint podcast, sir.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
So you have your PhD in developmental psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And what have you kind of developed? What has kind of developed into kind of your expertise so the audience knows?
Yeah, so developmental psychology is like the psychology of the developing human, usually from like obviously birth to death, but most of us focus on the pediatric age, so 0 to 18. And so over the last, 8 years since my PhD, I've gone the research route. So I do research and I teach, and my specialization is in pediatric mental health, and specifically in the context of family. So like I'm appended to not in a traditional psychology department. I'm in like a family studies department because my work on kids and mental health, I like to situate that in the context of family relationships and understand how family relationships shape mental health, how they help kids develop emotional resilience and things like that.
So why were you so interested in having more of a focus on like the family system? So you kind of developed a more of a specialty in kids, in kids' mental health. And it sounds like that kind of, it felt really important to you for you to start to have a focus on like the whole family system.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question because I think when we think clinically about like kids and just any individual really in therapy, but especially children, it can be tempting to think about them as like individuals. Mm-hmm. Like this individual is presenting a certain symptomology or presenting certain challenges. But the research is pretty clear that those symptoms are part of a greater whole. And for a child, that whole is connected to the relationships they have at home, primarily with their parents, their primary attachment figures. And so oftentimes what you'll see is kids presenting with challenges that are really challenges with the whole family system, if that makes sense.
Oh, totally.
But it's like they're the presenting patient, even though the dynamic that may be problematic might be between mom and dad. So that's kind of why understanding mental health from this perspective of like the whole family to me is important, because you can't really understand a child's emotional life without understanding their relational life at home.
Well, dude, I'm just stoked to have you on because I've known you for a long time.
Yeah.
17 years or something crazy.
To be precise.
18 years. And you're a brain. You've always been very smart. And it's cool to see you years later, like turn that into something that I know has been really impactful. And so I'm so excited to just grill you with some questions. But it's powerful what you're saying, because as a therapist, I totally see what you're saying, where a parent calls us and it's like, hey, like my teenager's the worst person, you need to fix them. And what happens almost every single time is we start working with a teenager, and it's like almost every single time it's like, oh, the issue is actually more with the parents and how they're parenting their child. Yeah. And this is why this kid is struggling. This is why this kid has anxiety or is defiant, whatever, or depressed. And so, but the parents fully believe It's just a bad kid. So I definitely want to get your thoughts on like how much of kids struggling, and I know you've kind of had an emphasis in anxiety with kids, but how much would you say kids struggling severely with mental health, anxiety, or depression, how much would you say that that's dependent on their relationship with their parents?
It's a good question. I think obviously it differs for every kid, and there's variability because everybody's situation is unique. You've got temperament factors, you've got other environmental factors in. But I would say it's a considerable factor in most cases where there's like clinical anxiety or depression.
Mm.
So it may not be the only factor. Oftentimes it's not the only factor, but for a lot of kids, I'd say 70 to 80% of kids that struggle, it's a considerable factor for positive or negative, right? So like maybe there's something wrong in the marital relationship or something challenging in the parent-child relationship that feeds a challenge. But it also means that for a lot of kids, the solution, and that's kind of the key here, is that the solution to some of these challenges, whether it's the parents or not, is going to be through parents and administered at home, if that makes sense.
Totally. It makes perfect sense. We make a lot of bold statements on this podcast. So we're just glad you're on so you can fact check us and make sure that we're not saying anything too crazy. Yeah, so I've prepped some questions, man, that I want to throw out there. You've already kind of touched on one, but I want to know just a little bit more about you, Adam. Why did you want to become an expert in children's mental health and development?
Yeah, that's a really good question. For me, I think as I studied psychology and as I studied the behavioral sciences as an undergraduate student, I became really fascinated with like trajectories of development, like how, like the idea that people, when you meet individuals, like there's a snapshot of their life, but there's a trajectory that led them here. And in almost every circumstance where there's flourishing or floundering, so to speak, those trajectories all like tie back to and have a basis in childhood experience. And so for me, it was trying to understand, like when we meet a person who may be struggling or who may be thriving, it's impossible to kind of understand that flourishing or that thriving or that challenge without understanding a lot of the experiences that they may have had growing up. I know that sounds pretty cliche, but like we know from really good data that early childhood experiences, middle childhood, adolescent experiences in particular, really shape trajectories of people into adulthood, whether those are for good or for worse, if that makes sense. So that drove me kind of towards studying some of these things as they emerge in childhood, with the idea being, if we can move the needle here during the early years, if we can create emotional resilience during these periods of life, then we're setting people up for a better trajectory.
Totally.
And that's kind of been my philosophy and school of thought.
That's pretty fascinating, man. I know that like every age is important. Is there some ages that are just that from the research or from what you've seen that are just like very critical, like almost like these critical points in a child's development where they need, I don't know, like is there ages that are just more critical than others?
I would say the way I'd answer that question is to say that different ages are critical for different things, if that makes sense. So it's not that one age is more important than another age overall. It's that during this age, these milestones need to be achieved relatively on time, or they need to be in place. And then at this phase, as the child grows and develops, then it's this new thing, right? So for example, in infancy, it's really all about attachment with a caregiver and developing that attachment. And that attachment will be important all throughout childhood. But as children age and grow, then new milestones come online and need to be addressed at each of those ages, if that makes sense.
Let's talk about the emotional needs specifically throughout like the developmental stages and maybe even from 0 to 17, 18? Is that
sure? Yeah.
Okay. So generally, is it the main emotional need of an infant? Is it physical touch?
That is how, so that's a really interesting way of putting it. I would say so children in that age, we know they don't think and process information the same way that adults do. It's very what's called a sensory motor period of development, meaning that the way they think has to do with sensation and movement. In other words, little babies and infants, even 18 months old, 24 months old, these children don't have really robust symbolic representations. And so the way they have to make meaning of the world, the way they have to make sense of the world is through physical interaction. And so it's exactly right. Like the way that they make sense of emotional connection isn't a thought, isn't an idea. It's physicality. It's physical touch.
Cool.
So it's super important for kids. It's going to continue to be important all throughout like early childhood, especially. But yeah, during that infancy stage, that's the primary mechanism of bonding is that physical touch and closeness.
So it's really cool to talk about this with parents or with potential parents that are having their first child. There's always a lot of like, are you ready? Am I going to be ready? Like, this is a big step for us. What reassurance, what like, if you were to shoot it to them straight, like, as long as you do this in the first 6 months of having a kid or a year of having a kid, like, that's pretty good.
Yeah. First
is it
of all,
basically physical touch?
So yeah, I mean, first of all, I love the idea that of you're saying like you're doing pretty good, because the transition to parenthood is tough, and like we can never be perfect. And I think parents can drive themselves crazy thinking about all the things, the mistakes they're making. And I think we're just going for like good enough. And when it comes to good enough, it's proximity, right? It's proximity for a child, which involves physical closeness and physical touch. I think a really important kind of nuance to that from the literature is that we know that children's attachment systems are built through physical touch, but especially when they experience distress. So when a child is scared, when a child is hurt, when a child is hungry, it's how we respond to children in those moments that builds their sense of trust or mistrust in their attachment and their caregiver. So when a young baby is like, when a 4-month-old is crying, they're distressed, that proximity conveys to the child that there's responsiveness to that distress. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So dude, I'm so fascinated, but I can't wait to go through some of these other stages. Yeah. So we're just starting with infancy, and then we're going to build up through some of the developments.
Sweet.
So physical touch is key, and it's powerful what you're saying, that what's really critical is when a child is in distress or afraid, that the parents are providing physical affection or touch or contact. So what about this idea that you need to let this baby cry it out?
Yeah.
Like, that's how they get tougher.
Yeah.
They need it.
Yeah. We have some interesting ideas about how we build resilience in kids. And that's a really common one. I didn't know if you're going to go there, but I was going to mention it too, which is a lot of parents think if they just let their baby cry it out, that they're somehow building toughness in their kid. And that's just
I feel like that's damaging.
For 0 to 6 months, I think the phrase that I keep coming back to, and the phrase I tell my students all the time, is you cannot spoil a baby when it comes to physical touch, because that's their primary way of understanding, knowing the world, knowing that they're okay, knowing who they can trust. So there may be applications like after 6 months of age that are limited, where you can let a baby cry. So for example, if you put a baby down to sleep.
Let's give it, like, maybe after 6 months, let's give it 10 minutes or 15 minutes and see if they can fall asleep.
Yeah, because sometimes crying can be a source of like getting energy out as they fall asleep.
Right.
But it's not going to be like, we're not going to want to depend on that as a primary emotion regulation technique. And this is because babies have a really hard time. I mean, they don't emotionally regulate, and they have to learn that. And the only way they learn that is through a process called co-regulation, which is where you meet the child in their emotional state and you help them down-regulate their emotions, so to speak.
Right. That's like the rocking and like the
exactly.
Like the pat, the pat. Yeah. My son, he loves these pats on the butt.
Yeah. And that only happens with proximity and physical touch for a young child.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I think that's good for 0 to 6 months. Okay. So we're moving right along. In therapy, I call these, I mean, my focus is what are the emotional needs of kids and teenagers, and how do parents meet those? And I might oversimplify it. So this is great that you're here. Okay. So let's move along. So now the child is developing past 6 months. Entering, I don't think it's right at 6 months. There's obviously some overlap here, but I don't know what are this? Is it 0 to 2, or is that a good?
Yeah, it's a little fuzzy, but I generally think about infancy as 0 to 24. I know the technical definition is 36 months, but I think developmentally 36 is so different than 24 months.
Okay.
So I'd say, 0 to 2. You can think of that as, that period is like really hard to spoil a child with physical affection and responsiveness. Okay. So it's just important to continue.
So that goes up to 2 or even 3.
So.
You can't show your kids enough love.
Yeah.
And
I think part of the fear that some parents have is that their kid will learn to manipulate them emotionally, and we just don't see that kind of advanced cognition yet in a child that can understand the idea of deception and manipulation, especially like in a 2-year-old. And so, does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm thinking of my own daughters, man. I'm like, she's almost 3, and the manipulation has begun.
Yeah,
she's not even 3 yet. So, but you're right. I think I just started
at about 24 months. Yeah.
Well, yeah. It's interesting. So, and they're good, man.
Yeah, they can.
They know what they're doing. I'm not. Anyways. So,
but I think the takeaway there, like the infancy period is attachment is number one. It's the absolute key to a child's like health and development and their sense of security in the world. There's so much research on this, and that's accomplished through responsiveness when our children are in distress. And in that context, it is difficult to spoil a baby. Like we can't be too responsive at those young ages. That physical proximity seeking is what will convey that secure attachment. Yeah.
Okay. And then correct me if I'm wrong. And then what I've noticed is that, after the physical touch seems really important until like 2-ish. Mm-hmm. Well, it's important, I think, throughout, like you said, but
sure.
What I've seen after the 6 months or the physical touch is that's when, how does a child feel attached to us after 6 months? Or what does that start to develop into? How do they start to feel loved from us? That's when I really start to notice play becomes super important.
Yeah.
And so I want to get your thoughts on like after the physical touch phase, after that's maybe the main primary, like you said, mechanism for attachment. Am I getting that right? That play is kind of becomes a pretty important, connection piece or attachment piece. I don't know if that's the way you'd say it.
Sure. Yeah. And I don't know that we would say, and I know this is not what you're saying. We're not going to supplant proximity and closeness.
Still continue.
Yeah,
We're just kind of adding.
We can add this new piece on. And,
right.
And I think you're
that's
right.
That's a good clarification.
Between ages of like 3 to 5-ish, we call this the pre-operational stage. So operations, think cognitive, mental operations. Kids can have symbolic thought now, like they have robust symbolic thought, but it's hard for them to make sense of like symbolic operations, like logical forms, like if-then thinking. That makes sense. Mm-hmm. And so they're still very like hands-on. I think Maria Montessori, like the Montessori educate, right? Maria Montessori said something like the hands are the instruments of a child's intelligence. And so they're very hands-on. They're very experiential.
That's an amazing quote.
Yeah, it is.
Can you say that again?
The hands are the instruments of a child's intelligence.
The hands are the instruments of a child's intelligence. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah. And to get to your point about play, and that's why play is so important for this age, because their learning continues to be very experiential. It's not yet super like cognitive like we think about it as adults. For kids, learning is play, and play is growth. It's enjoyable, but it's also like the work that they do to learn about themselves and their world, their attachment to other people in their world, because play simulates a safe environment for them to like explore their surroundings. And so, yeah, I think play is a really great context and opportunity for connection between parent and child.
Cool.
Parent or children, I guess, feel that connection strongly through the experience of play because of that.
What I've seen, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, what I've seen is that parents get so frustrated at their kids when their kids are 3 or 4 or 5, because they're like, tell me how you're feeling. Like, what's wrong? And then the kid doesn't say anything. And then the parents are like, why won't you tell me what's wrong? It's like that quote brings on a whole new meaning. It's like, well, because the hands are the, what's the quote again? The hands
are the instruments of the child's intelligence. Yeah. And you nailed it. Yeah.
And so of course, parent, you're going to get frustrated. Your kid has not developed the emotional intelligence or whatever you want to call it to be able to A, know what they're feeling, and then B, to be able to express that to you. It's like, but if you then maybe engage in what we call like play therapy, where you get down on the floor with them and you maybe reenact, or you have them reenact the experience, then they will share with you how they feel through play.
Yeah.
We had this experience with our 5-year-old the other day, and it was horrible. She had a sliver in her foot, and she knew that if we saw it or knew about it, that we were going to take it out and that it was going to hurt. And so she didn't tell us for like a week.
Whoa.
So it started to get gnarly. And my wife was like kind of unsure what to do. And I said, we're taking this out right now. Like, she's like, no, I think we should take her to the doctor. I'm like, no, it's the time, like we can get it out. Anyway, so my daughter's freaking out, crying. I have to pin her down. Right. And she's like screaming bloody murder. And anyways, long story short, we get the sliver out and she's just laying on the bed, just crying. And that she went to bed early that night, just bawled, like, and just went to bed sad. And the next day she's playing with her sister and I think my wife, and she's reenacting this experience where her younger sister is her. And she's having to take the sliver out. And it was just it was kind of funny, but she was expressing real emotion. Like,
Exactly.
I was like, you must be so scared.
Yeah.
It's like they can't do it directly, but they're using their hands, they're playing. And it's like, it's like when we struggle, it's like we call up our friend and like, dude, this was rough. Let me tell you about it. Like she was doing the exact same thing. She was like expressing it and processing it through play.
Yeah.
So
common. So common for kids, but we miss it all the time as adults because we're expecting kids to tell us how they feel, or we're just not present enough to take the time to allow that play to develop in a way that will bespeak and reveal like what it is they're working through. Yeah.
Well, I love the terminology you just used there. Parents aren't present enough to take the time to let the expression develop. So let's talk about that. What does that look like? How? Because we've been talking a lot on this podcast, the importance of being present and still and in the moment, and how that's where all true like creativity and connection emerges from. That's where God is. So like it's a good place to be in. What does that look like for a parent to be present with their kid to help them express difficult emotions?
Yeah, good question. I think on one hand, it means to be safe, like to live with our child in a way where they perceive that we're trustworthy, that we're a safe person, that they can be themselves around, which means not being harsh or punitive in our everyday interactions with them. I mean, yeah, sometimes we'll have to discipline children, but that's not the same thing as being harsh or punitive. Sometimes we get those things mixed up. I think children need to perceive that they're connected to us in that way. I think it means also, for a lot of children, it means being on their level, like literally physically being on their level.
100%.
Yeah. My kids like to play on the floor. My daughter especially. She's like, that's where her play exists. And it's literally about me sitting down on the floor with her and being in that space. Because again, they're very sensory motor, pre-operational, like they're experiential, and that's their level.
It's so powerful you're saying that, because why are some parents like resistant to that? Or why are parents resistant to getting on their child's level, their younger child's level physically, like getting down low on the floor and playing with them? I think there's a lot of reasons. One simple reason though, explanation is like, oh, it's kind of uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to be on my knees. I don't want to be like sitting awkwardly. And that's like a sacrifice.
Yeah.
Like view that as like a sacrifice. Okay, I'll be a little uncomfortable. I'll have to like, my shoulder might hurt a little bit or my back, but it's like, I don't claim to be that good at this. This is a good reminder for me, but it's so important, man. It's so important. I want to get your thoughts on, okay, so we're talking about getting on their level. We're talking about how to some of the best practices of like how to play with your kids so that they feel connected to us. I want to ask you a question on something you said. You were talking about how the importance of safety, and how we were talking earlier, how failure is basically built in to the parenting experience, and how that's okay. What makes that okay? Because there's these moments that every parent has, I feel like, where they maybe yell at their kid, or their kid might be doing something and they might, I don't know, give them a smack on the head or something, and then afterwards feel bad about that, or like, oh, I shouldn't have reacted that way. Like, what kind of reassurance can you give parents that occasionally react in not safe ways?
Or in ways that are just like not consistent with what a child needs. And that, I see what you're saying. I think there's a couple things that, help me personally, like in my own parenting mishaps and mistakes. Number one is just knowing that children are resilient and they'll be okay. Like, they can weather some of our mistakes.
They're so resilient.
And they're so forgiving too. Like, they're so willing to forgive. They're trusting, which, we don't want to take advantage of that, obviously, in our kids, but we can be grateful for it as parents. I think the other thing too is knowing that when we talk about these attachment systems that we need to develop with our children, we're not talking about being perfect. The research talks about like there's a magic ratio, meaning that there's 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative interaction, meaning about 80% of the time you're responding well. And that's going to be so enough for a child to get the consistent message that when I'm hurt or when I'm scared, this is like mom will respond this way, dad will respond this way, and I can trust them. It's where we start to get to like ratios of 1-to-1, like for every positive, there's a negative. And because that, if you think about it in a child's mind, it feels arbitrary. It's like, well, it's a flip of a coin. Based on how I express my distress, I can't tell if they're going to go this way or that way.
How do I know what to expect?
Exactly.
It's unsafe. It's uncertain.
Right.
And this is probably one of the main root causes of anxiety in children, right?
I think
inconsistent responses from parents. I don't know. I've seen that. I've seen that in my world of therapy. That is like a pretty big factor.
When there's consistent inconsistency is when we see the development of what's called an anxious attachment style, or an ambivalent attachment style is sometimes what it's called. The term there, ambivalent, right? The word ambivalent, meaning mixed feelings, mixed emotions. And so the child wants the connection. And we see this really interestingly. Like you'll see 18-month-olds, 2-year-olds do this a lot, where they'll have a situation where they're playing with their mom. It's called the strange situation, if you're familiar with this. But and then it's like an experimental paradigm. Mom will leave the room. Caregiver will leave the room. Child is distressed. That's very normal. That's like what we should be seeing when mom leaves and they're in the room alone or with a stranger. Mom comes back in, and it's on the reuniting that we see the attachment style. So a secure kid, a kid that feels securely attached to mom, is going to go to mom and be very quickly and easily soothed because there's confidence there that mom can soothe me. But with an ambivalent or anxious child, that child is going to connect to mom. They're going to go to mom, but they're going to try to push her away at the same time because they're ambivalent and they don't know whether to trust or how mom's going to react to their distress in this situation.
That's so fascinating you're saying that, because I've noticed that with my own kids. Like if they're crying and they're in distress, how comfortable do they feel towards me as their dad coming to me? Or if I offer a hug, how comfortable of an experience are they like pulling away? If they pull away or don't want it, in my mind, I'm like, okay, I got a little bit more work to do to build that safety, that safety in this attachment that you're talking about.
Yeah, that's an interesting application to like everyday parenting, which is we learn a lot from our children's response, or the reuniting, so to speak, when our child is in distress. How they're responding to that moment of reuniting conveys a lot about how they trust and who they trust. If that makes sense.
That's powerful. So without being too hard on yourself, parent, you can use how does your kid respond to you when you offer love when they are distressed?
Yeah,
that can be a great indicator of like how well you are actually, regardless of what you think or what other people think, your kid will tell you the truth through their comfort level in situations like that.
I love what you said there too. You said, regardless of what you think or what others think, because the number one predictor when we look at relationship quality between parent and child, when we look at attachment quality between parent and child, there's the parent's perception and there's the child's perception. And sometimes they're very weakly correlated with each other, meaning that parents are often overestimating the quality of relationship and kids are reporting kind of lower than what parents are reporting. And the most important variable by far is not the parent's perception when it comes to a child's mental health. It's not the parent's perception of how their relationship, it's the child's perception. Every single,
that's what matters.
Yeah. Yeah. Far and away. When you put those two things into a controlled statistical model, the one that rises to the top every time is what the child thinks about the relationship quality. And sometimes those aren't, they're not really like,
that's
sometimes
fascinating.
They're disparate. Yeah.
That's fascinating. So we're talking about, as a parent, how can you know if you have a good attachment with your own kids? Well, we're saying 80% of the time, the goal is to a B- or higher with how you are responding.
And that's enough.
And that's enough. And so we're talking about that. And then we're talking about, how does your kid respond to you when you offer affection or when they're distressed?
Yeah.
So those are great indicators. Anything you want to add to that? Other ways that parents can tell how they're doing?
I think those are really good. Those are we're talking about this younger age group where it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard for them to express
kids.
their feelings. It's hard for them to know how to state things. Those are really concrete ways of being able to.
Cool.
Yeah. See, and I think another important thing to mention here too is that I talk a lot about, like in my classes and in my research, I talk a lot about like skills and parenting skills, and those are important. But I mean, in all of our statistical models, 40 to 50% of the variance in a child's emotional adjustment is down to the relationship that they have with a parent, which means that we can be terribly unskilled at things, and that's going to be okay if our child knows that we care about them, that we're a secure base, that we're a safe haven for them. Does that make sense?
100%.
So the biblical phrase that I think it's Peter uses is, love covers a multitude of sins. And I think that that's really true about parenting is we can fail so many times in so many ways and not have the skill sets, and they're going to be okay if they know that they can trust and fall back on the secure base. And we want to teach skills because they can move the needle a little bit too, but really that's the foundation, I think.
It's a beautiful conversation so far, man. It's reminding me that I need to do better with my oldest.
Same.
With my oldest.
I think I've got
my 2, almost 3-year-old. Man, when she would respond, when she was in distress and she would run away from me, I'm like, no, like I got to put in work, and that's gotten so much better. So I feel good about that. But man, my 5-year-old, I gotta put in a little bit more playtime. And she's 5, so she's more starting to get more imaginative, and I can't
beautiful age. Yeah.
Can't wait to talk about that a little bit more with you, kind of that after, as play develops into imagination. But I think one thing that I think is cool to just, as we wrap up maybe this younger phase, is I think a really powerful message is it's okay. As a parent, how can I feel better about myself as a parent if I'm really trying, but just occasionally failing? Like, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay, because kids are not going to remember these, or they might remember it, but it's not going to
remember them differently. Yeah.
It's not going to significantly affect their life. These random moments where you don't respond well. How are you showing up consistently? Like, I love the, this is what I always tell people, especially with teenage, because I see some teenage clients and their parents, is like, it's okay. Like, it's so cool to actually research back this whole 80% thing. Cause that's kind of like, that's kind of what has always kind of I don't know if I've thought that specific number, but that's just kind of what's always made sense to me based on what I've seen. So
because that number is consistent enough for a young child to see patterns, for their brain to see the patterns and say, yeah, this is trustworthy here.
Cool.
So yeah.
Okay.
I was going to say something else on that point, but
can I ask a question actually?
Yeah.
I'm just curious about like the correlation that you see. You mentioned that like it really matters what the child's perception is of like how things are going emotionally, how parents are responding is like the barometer for knowing if the parents did well, right, in these areas. You talked about that like 80-20 rule. Is it the perception of how they talk about those experiences as adults, right? Does that make sense? Like, is that
they reflect how they
reflect on that? Because when you think about it, when I think about my parents, all the times that they maybe yanked on my ear and pulled me down the stairs and did things that maybe they regret.
That's
the overarching summary that I have created in my mind was they were amazing parents, and yet I can remember all these like moments of pull your parent card moments. But I don't know if that's a strong correlation there or not.
No, I think that's a really beautiful way of thinking about it, because I can relate to that, where like as an adult, I can see like areas of my parents' parenting that I'm like, I think I maybe hope to do something different.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Completely.
But the thing is though, I reflect on that with all the love and respect, because I never once doubted my whole growing up that my parents loved me unconditionally.
Exactly.
And I'm really lucky to have that experience in my life. And so the burden again is off of us to be perfect, because if our child knows that we love them, I can remember the time that like my mom said this or my dad spanked me in this way. And then I can just be like, but I know they were doing their best.
Their motives were.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because you know what their motives were.
Anyway.
And that is trustworthy. Is that kind of what you were?
Totally.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah.
So on the flip side of that, as a therapist, I think what's interesting is I see extremes both ways, where there's some adults that had pretty amazing parents, but they maybe failed in some ways, and the child is overly harsh or critical of how their parents were to them. But I think what I often see more, to be honest, is I see adults who they're not really seeing the negative impact enough. They respect their parents, they love their parents, but they're not seeing how it's negatively impacted them enough. And the reason why that's important, we're not trying to put some positive spin on reality for you. So we want you to be honest about it, not critical. We want you to be honest about it so that you can heal.
Yeah.
So that you can forgive and go through. We've been talking about this on the podcast, the importance of being honest with how your parents have impacted you, so that you can recognize how they've negatively affected you in your life, and so that you can heal from that and heal from that parent wound, is what we call it. So going back to your question, Dane, I'd say that that's probably a pretty unreliable source of knowing how good our parents were, is based on the perception of an adult, because it seems to be, I don't know.
There's too many blind spots.
I often see that that's pretty skewed. This is my experience in therapy. I've rarely seen someone accurately have a full picture of the good and the negative that's come from how their parents have affected them.
Interesting.
And that's so important. Again, the honesty of that leads to can lead to great healing and strength. That's the whole point of looking at it. So it's a pretty cool question though, Dane. So it's a hard balance to have.
I think the hardest thing about it is like just the blind spots that are there, that you don't know what you're missing or what you're, you know what I mean? Just going off of what you're saying. 'Cause I could have a bunch of undealt stuff that I just have no idea that's inhibiting my ability to improve in certain areas of my life. But I guess that's why therapy is potentially like a proactive, like there's a case to be made to be proactive about your therapy and about, I don't know, making, you know what I'm saying? Like there's just too many, for me at least. I feel like I don't know that I don't know what I don't know, I guess is what I'm saying. As far as like how maybe my parents negatively impacted certain areas of my life. You know what I mean?
I think a really cool spiritual perspective. Look, like our parents messed us up exactly the way that we needed. So it's all good. The negative is can turn into this beautiful gift, and then obviously the good is good as well. So,
and I didn't mean to derail it, but
no, not at all. But I think that's interesting. I mean, and is it too reductionistic to refer to our parents as either messing us up or not? Like, does that make sense? Like, maybe not all of our pathology is necessarily due just to our parents.
Oh, totally.
I mean, it's interaction of like our own personalities, our temperaments, how that fits with our parents' personalities and temperaments,
teachers and friends,
friends, all throughout the developmental period, which is.
Yeah, there's some psychologists that believe that all of the negative behavior we have can tie back to.
There's a tradition of that belief, yeah, for sure.
And I obviously don't subscribe to that, but my experience in diving deep with people is that most of it seems to be. And it's I wouldn't say a lot of it seems to be. And I'm talking about like deeper, emotionally rooted struggles for people as an adult, like maybe addictions or behavior, like relationship. I don't know why I'm so drawn to, I'm like the broken chick whisperer. I don't know what's going on. I only attract these broken women, and it's like a pattern in my life, so, things like that, like patterns and deeper, it's often, I've often seen that be connected to parents, but.
And that's the other thing is like parenting's tough. Like parenting is a real, like, it's a trip, man, because like I study this stuff professionally. I've been doing it for well over a decade. And a lot of people are like, well, you must be an amazing parent because you know all these things. And it's like, dude, parenting is like 10% intellectual and the rest is like physical and emotional and spiritual, and it's hard work. And so I mess up in all the ways that any parent messes up. I just know about it more. And so now I have to deal with the guilt on top of that because I know what I'm doing wrong all the time. But
it's a blessing and a curse.
But
well, that's pretty fascinating though, because I love what you're saying, because as soon as like, some people say that as a therapist, they make assumptions like, oh, the relationship with your wife must be like amazing because you know so much about relationships or whatever. It's like, as soon as I go home and we start to get into a slight argument, all of that knowledge goes out the window. All of it.
Yeah.
So I think the thing that comes up for me when you say that is perhaps what's more important than skill as a parent is what is coming up for me emotionally. Am I looking at my own emotions? Am I trying to listen and learn from my own emotions that come up as a parent or in any of my relationships? That is your spirit telling you what you need and what you need to look at. And we've been laying that out throughout this podcast of the importance of that. And it's just cool as a researcher and an expert to hear you say it's 10%, it's 10% skill, 90% like who you are emotionally and spiritually.
Oh yeah. And that's a really good way of putting it. I think that's a nice way to reframe it too. I mean, on one hand, we're saying, parenting is really hard. But then on the other hand, we're saying, but it's also a real opportunity to like hold a mirror up to yourself. Your children are like your biggest educator here. One of the hardest things for me about parenting that I never realized before I became a parent was learning to help a child emotionally regulate in their environment while I myself am so dysregulated by life and by their behavior. And if you don't resist that, and if you can sit with that and observe it with curiosity, your children are basically eliciting from you the things, like the parts of you that need the inner work, if that makes sense. It's so, I mean, when it comes to parenting, I'm convinced that a lot of it is like you get who you are as a parent, if that makes sense.
I totally agree with that.
Okay.
I totally agree with that. Oh, my kid is such a horrible person. Da, 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 da,
Yeah.
da. If you hold up a mirror, I wouldn't say all of it is that,
Yeah.
but it's a reflection. Kids are so pure, especially at these young ages.
Mhm.
There's a purity to them. There's a sensitivity. There's a gentleness, a humility. It's just all comes natural. And so how your kids react to you, in most cases, I would say, tell me if you think, I think is mostly you.
I think I think there's a lot of wisdom in that statement. Yeah. Yeah. You get who you are with kids.
You get who you are. Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah. I mean, like, I had an example where my 4-year-old was a couple years ago, our 4-year-old was going through some stuff with some anxiety, which became a big catalyst for like wanting to study this more diligently myself. But that was a hard experience. One of the ways that he manifested it was that he would just ignore us. Like he just would not listen. And initially it was tempting to see an obstinate child that was just like, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you listening? But when we sat with it, when we tried to understand it, what we realized was that tendency for him to ignore and not listen was because he didn't feel heard. He felt like we were ignoring him in his environment. Not necessarily that we were trying to, but there were needs that he was trying to express that he didn't feel were heard. And the way that he told us about that was by not hearing us, if that makes sense. And that's really common in kids. Like we have to just step back and say, maybe he's not seeing this the way I'm seeing this because he thinks differently than me. And maybe there's a mirror here that we need to hold up and realize how much of a dynamic this is, and maybe not a problem child, but there's a dynamic at play.
As a parent, what is the best role to view myself as a parent? What is am I the teacher or am I the student? I
don't know how to answer that. Yeah.
I believe that if you want your kids to be better listeners, you have to mirror the example of a student. You have to be willing to learn from them. And then they will be willing to learn from you. That's what I have seen the most in my own kids. And so I'm like, I just think as parents, it's easy to have this ego with parenting that like, I am the older one. I know, but your kids have just come from this really pure space. You're further from purity than they are. And I believe in many ways, in perhaps the more important ways, that they actually have more to teach you. Or they have, I guess I shouldn't, they have a lot to teach you if you're willing to listen.
Yeah.
So get off this pedestal of thinking that you are this great teacher to your students. Obviously, it's important to teach them, but really you should be in both roles. And I think most parents need to be in the role of a student.
Yeah.
Is my opinion.
Yeah. And I totally agree with that. And I know that what you're saying is not that there shouldn't be boundaries and that there shouldn't be, and like parents do have to be the leaders in their homes as well. But yeah, I completely agree, because going back to that experience, the phrase that turned things around for us with him in that situation, when we had a child who was expressing anxiety this way and some distress by not listening and not hearing us. The phrase that totally turned it around for us was that we started to say to him, like when he was in distress or when we started to say, "Hey, I hear you. I understand you." And that was the only thing, like that phrase that we stumbled on started to change things. It didn't mean that he got what he wanted in every situation. It didn't mean that things necessarily changed from every time, but now he felt heard in his environment. And this is maybe a good segue, because you were talking about what do children need in early childhood and as they move into later childhood. And that's what they need. They need to feel heard in their environment. They need to feel like they have a sense of autonomy, that they have a sense of, does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense, man. That's really awesome. That's really awesome. I definitely want to talk more about this balance that you're referring to of kind of being a friend, but also a parent. I'm curious on your thoughts of this balance between how firm should I be versus.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of wing this one here a little bit because I don't know.
That's all we do.
I don't know. I don't know that I would think about it in terms of like on one end of the spectrum is friend, on the other is parent, and where is the balance? The academic literature on this refers to what we call parenting styles. And there's probably like 3 or 4 common parenting styles that parents use that basically blend 2 things primarily, maybe 3, but 2 in particular, which is how responsive and open are you? And then on one hand, how demanding are you? And what we want, ideally, the kids who are most well-adjusted are the ones who come from homes where there is expectation, there is demandingness in terms of like boundaries, but that there's also high responsiveness and high openness. And what that looks like in practice is that children are involved in the decision-making at home. The children are involved in important decisions like creating rules and consequences for those rules. Does that make sense? And it's a tough balance to strike because a lot of parents fall into, I'm in charge, I'm the parent. We do what I say because I made the decisions. And we call that authoritarian.
Mm-hmm.
And that word authoritarian refers to like deriving from authority.
And Hitler.
Sure, I guess. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have what's called permissive, which is there's not a lot of demandingness. There's not a lot of boundary. There's not a lot of like hierarchy between parent and child. Child can do whatever they want. Parents are basically their child's best friend. And kids get into a lot of trouble with that situation too. The ideal is what's called authoritative, which means approved by authority. So the parent would be the leader in the home, but ideally, like the family comes together and they can, to the degree that the child is capable of this, participate in important family conversations. And then it becomes sanctioned by the parents, if that makes sense. That's a tough thing to do in practice all the time, but I think it's what we want to aim for. We want to have expectations, but we also want to have the openness and the responsiveness at home to a child's thoughts and opinions. Children need to feel heard, right?
That's kind of blowing my mind, that definition, because I've heard those parenting styles so much, but I've never heard it explained as authoritative is simply put approved by authority.
Yeah.
That is powerful because I'm just thinking of the application of this. It's like, my daughter comes and says, Dad, can I have a piece of candy? And my immediate answer is no, which is fine to say that, by the way.
Sure.
But if I say no all the time, maybe what could be better is to say like, I don't know, approved by authority. Like what would be a circumstance in which, I don't know, like when I don't know.
Or maybe you could say like, well, we know that like the rule in our home is, and the rule that we've agreed upon as a family is that you get like 1 sweet per day. And if you want to have that right now, that's okay. But then you won't get one after dinner time.
Awesome.
Right?
Yes.
So that could be one way of like managing that conversation, but it presumes that you've had those conversations and that you've allowed your child to be a participant in those conversations. It doesn't mean that they always get their way, but it also doesn't mean that like the rules have to be completely derived by us. Sometimes our children come up with great ideas that can be implemented in the home. And that's a way of showing that we value their perspective and their opinion.
I love that because it takes the ego out of parenting and kind of puts it more in a level playing field of respect and an understanding them and hearing them. That's pretty cool. That's really
And by
awesome,
the way,
man.
this is not the same thing as gentle parenting that is like hashtagging around right now. This whole gentle parenting movement where there's no like boundaries, no expectations. Like authoritative is, there are high expectations, but it's that those expectations derive from the family and they're sanctioned by the parents. But does that make sense?
Totally makes sense.
I would say that there's like basically 3 ingredients to that authoritative parenting. There's structure in the home, which breeds predictability and stability for a child. So there's clear rules and boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2 would be democratic participation, meaning that children can participate in those conversations at home, allows them to feel heard, but it also allows them to contribute to that like have a seat at the table. And then the most important is just responsiveness, like being able to see and hear and understand and validate where our children are coming from in those conversations. And yeah, that makes.
That's great, man. That's great. So before we move on, we're moving on to the development of now, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds maybe. I want to ask you a couple of questions about what you've seen in the research or what you've seen in your experience. One of the pieces of research that I was exposed to a few years ago that I've seen play out a lot as a therapist is that never has the visual learning or visual processing ever been higher in, I think it was young adults, is like, I think it was like 20s is what this study was referring to. And this was like, I think 7 years ago, meaning that people are, it's like the visual age. People are more visually processing from what this study showed in these like young adults and diverse, whatever. Have you seen any indication of that kids are processing more visually now than they ever have? I don't know if you've heard or seen.
Yeah. When you say visually, do you mean less hands-on? More visual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's a lot of talk about this. I assume you're referring to like all the screens and screen-based media that they consume. Is that
one? I'm sure that's a factor in some of this. Yeah. And I think there's great consequences to that. And then there's also, good and bad.
Yeah. If I understand where you're going with this, I know that it's kind of a hot topic and a controversy in the science as well, is when we know that what's important for children at this age is experiential learning, hands-on learning,
hands
and relationships, like in-person relationships, we start to have concerns about the amount of time that kids spend on screens, whether that's on the internet, social media, whether it's playing video games. TV. And it's not because necessarily the content is necessarily like bad or harmful. I mean, there's some better content than others, but it's because this content displaces. It's what it displaces. The number, I think the estimate is 7 to 8 hours a day on average children are spending on screen-based entertainment media.
Oh my gosh, man.
7 to 8 hours per day.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a third of their lives. And that's displacing one-on-one time with people. Is displacing that what you referred to earlier as just being present in a moment. Mm-hmm. It's displacing opportunities for sensory motor learning. And there's, I think, legitimate concern to be had over that, because for decades we've known that this is how children learn. It's how they process information, and it's how they grow. It's how they understand their world. And so I think the research is still to be determined, like what these effects are going to be on kids. But some could argue that we're already seeing those effects because we're seeing mental health challenges that are 2 to 3 times higher than what we see just 10 years ago in kids.
Wow. That's fascinating, man. Thanks for sharing that. It's crazy how, if you were to ask most parents, like, how long do you think your kids spend on screens every day?
Yeah.
They would probably very underreport, like, probably 2 hours or 3 hours, but it's like 7 to 8 on average.
Yeah.
That blows my mind.
Yeah. It's wild.
That's sad to me.
Yeah.
It's really
it's just
sad.
So pervasive, right?
And and throughout the lifespan, that like you said, that's just going to affect sociality, like so much, like their ability to connect. That's crazy.
Yeah.
We're talking about the disintegration of society on the last podcast.
It's pretty heavy.
This is this is for sure a precursor to some of that, I'm sure.
Some would argue, yeah.
Some would argue.
I just say that because there's...
Yeah, some people think it's good.
I think some people say that the data are not out yet.
Oh.
My personal opinion is that like we don't need the data to like tell us what should be obvious.
Yeah.
Which is this isn't like healthy, the way that we're managing this stuff. Like there's nothing wrong with media inherently, but the way that we're using these technologies and the way that children are engaging with them is just not the way that children were designed to grow.
I couldn't agree with that more.
So, yeah.
Couldn't agree with that more. I want to ask you one more question about mirroring. So we've been talking about holding up the mirror, but maybe talking about mirroring in a different way of children learning maybe the definition of mirroring. I guess I'll just ask you, the expert, what is a good definition of mirroring, and how important is that in our kids becoming awesome humans?
I use that term not as a technical term, but just because that's the only thing I could think of calling it was mirroring.
But mirroring, like, being the example, kids picking up on our behaviors and then reenacting those, kind of just mirroring what we do.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I guess is in the context that I'm kind of asking the question.
I see what you mean. So mirroring is a tool for like teaching our children.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, so for probably like 50 years, scientists have talked about this. They call it observational learning.
Yep.
Which I'm sure you've obviously heard about, or modeling. And that is one of many ways that children learn from adults. And we know that it is contingent, again, on the relationship a child has with their parent. So your child is more likely to mirror the good things that you do when they respect you and when they feel respected by you, primarily. So
again, it goes back to this responsiveness and this attachment, this connection.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense.
There's also a form of, I guess we could call it mirroring, but I kind of talked about this earlier, but it's called co-regulation. And it's really easy in the home. We know that emotions are contagious between dyads and triads. And in parent-child relationships, emotion can be contagious. So when a child presents as really anxious or fearful, that emotional state can be picked up easily by the parent just subconsciously, and vice versa. And so it's kind of an important thing to understand that, like, when we think about parenting, we often think that, I'm going to influence my child. But one of the truths that we've seen really clearly is that children influence parents a lot as well. But if we're not aware of that as parents, if we're not aware of the ways our children influence us, for example, by how they make us feel or the feelings they draw out of us,
right, then
we can easily get trapped into some potentially negative patterns of like this maladaptive synchrony, emotional synchrony. But on the other hand, if we're aware of that, it allows us to like kind of take our place as the emotional leaders of our home. And we can help our children learn proper emotion regulation by modeling that for them and inviting them into that process through a synchrony, co-regulation type of mechanism.
We were talking about that earlier a little bit, right? Like the importance of being aware of what you're feeling emotionally and trying to listen and learn from that.
Yeah.
Is key in life and also in parenting. How familiar are you with like trauma and the impacts of that in a family system for a kid or for...
From an academic perspective, I'm familiar with the literature. I know that the clinical perspective is just as important on that as well. And I'm not a clinician, but...
Well, let's merge both of those.
Let's try it. Yeah.
Because I just want to ask maybe one or two questions on that I think would be really helpful. These sad experiences that happen for parents where maybe their kid goes and plays over at a neighbor's house and then there's some sexual abuse or physical abuse or something. And then the parent feels like, oh my gosh, my kid is now ruined. This is going to ruin his life, and is in this great distress. What's your thoughts on that response or that reaction from a parent? Maybe specifically just get your initial thoughts on how, like, it's obviously okay to respond that way and it's very normal. How accurate is that, though, in the long run for a child to have a negative, abusive experience and then they're now doomed for their life? Like, it's going to negatively affect them their whole life.
Yeah, I don't know that I would say that doom is the right word, obviously. I mean, but it feels that way. And like you're saying, that's a pretty natural thing to feel, and it's a normal thing to feel, and parents should feel those feelings and like what those feelings are revealing about their response to the situation as well. We know from like a lot of scientific literature that those adverse childhood experiences can go a long way in shaping mental health trajectories, unfortunately, because trauma begets more trauma oftentimes.
Mhm.
And it's especially true where we see compounding adverse childhood experiences or traumas where there's not just one, but now there's like, we're talking like there's 3 or 4 or 5. So you're talking
Mhm.
about, and the case that you mentioned was of kind of an extreme form, but it happens, which is abuse, right? And imagine that compounding with something like the loss of a parent or the divorce of their parents, which are experienced by children as traumatic too. And as those compile, then yeah, you're probabilistically increasing the odds that that child will experience some pathology later in life. And I don't think the way we think about that is that they're doomed, but I think we have to recognize as parents that this changes the situation. This changes the constraints that my child will experience throughout life. This could change aspects of how we have to now manage emotion in the home, how we have to manage their experiences. So
It's just such a good perspective, man. I want to share maybe some good news or some hope
yeah,
in a situation like that. Or, depending on the severity, I obviously shared it a little more severe, but what is the hope as a parent if my kid experiences some form of abuse or something traumatic? Well, the hope is that they have done this research where they took, I can't remember the details because I don't want to botch it, but they took this large group of kids who they all had experienced like some form of sexual or physical abuse, like pretty severe stuff, like in childhood, in younger childhood. And the prediction is that nearly all these kids were going to have serious effects as an adult, like self-worth issues,
I see what you're saying,
relationship issues, or addictions, And certainly many of them did. But there's the smaller group of adult children that were very, like, it was as if, like, they were really healthy. It was as if there was no trauma in their past. And what was fascinating is they then did research on, like, okay, were there any commonalities between these groups? And for the kids that really struggled, what they all had in common is they all had 0 parents that, as throughout teenage years specifically, that they felt comfortable opening up with as a teenager. They didn't feel comfortable opening up with their mom for whatever reason, nor their dad. And what's fascinating is what all of these kids had in common that were able to heal from the trauma into adulthood and be really good is they had at least one parent that they could open up to and receive response and comfort from, specifically as a teenager.
yeah.
Okay, so that's always been pretty fascinating to me. And I think there is a lot of hope. So the hope is that if you, and I'm focusing more on teen years because that's what this research was correlated with, but especially as your kids get older, if you're really, I almost kind of view the younger years as establishing the safety. I love the word, can you establish some safety and, connection? I can't wait to talk about the teen years because that's probably more of my exposure is teens. And the hope is that if they feel comfortable opening up with you and that's consistent, there's a lot, like you said, they're resilient and they can really heal way more. Yeah. So curious, just any initial thoughts on that?
No, yeah. I mean, you summarized it really well. I agree.
I just think there's a lot of, now one of our guests shared, I think the deepest trauma that somebody can experience from what I have seen is somebody that has experienced sexual abuse or a strong physical from their parent, from this caregiver. And when we had Anna on the podcast, she shared her story because she had this, this happened for her. And it was just like, and she's a highly emotional, highly sensitive woman who also happened to experience the deepest and most severe trauma, perhaps. And if she can heal and kind of experience this spiritual and emotional transformation, it's like it was such a beautiful and powerful like witness of the Spirit of Christ if you believe in that, or just the spirit of healing that is
Sure.
that can be found. And that's as we seek it.
If you have benefited from this podcast in any way, it would mean the world to us to have you subscribe, to allow us to keep it going and bring on inspirational human beings.